Welcome, everyone, to Lunchtime Discovery. This program is a partnership with the Office of Environmental Education in the North Carolina Museum of Natural Sciences. I'm Carrie Woke. I'm an educator at the museum, and I'm filling in for Chris Smith today. So we have a really exciting program planned for you. We're going to dive into maximizing the social and ecological roles of artificial reefs. So today I have with me Zach Harrison, who is the artificial reef biologist with the North Carolina Division of Marine Fisheries. Zach, welcome to the program.
Thanks, Carrie. It's an honor to be able to be included and help y'all celebrate Earth Month.
Oh, absolutely. We have, and if you have not seen any of our Earth Month programs, you can check out the museum's YouTube playlist. We had a whole full day of programming for Earth Day during our Triangle Sci-Tech Expo. So Zach, you're going to tell us a little bit about these artificial reefs.
I sure am.
Awesome. Take it away.
All right. Well, so I just first want to say thanks for y'all, to y'all for having me, to the museum and to DEQ, to DMF, and to Support Fish Restoration, which is a lot of our funding as well. And so I'm going to take you through artificial reefs and what we do with the Artificial Reef Program. And so the first thing I want to talk about is what is an artificial reef? And so the way we define it at DMF are they're areas that are designated, maintained, and permitted by us. They're intentionally placed on the seafloor to provide habitat for finfish, shellfish, and create fishing and diving opportunities. And the materials are set to maximize longevity and function. So here's one of the sinkings of a tugboat known as the Fort Fisher. This occurred about 2 miles off of Pine Knoll Shores in the Morehead City, kind of Beaufort area. And so when we're defining this, the big thing for us is that it's material that's placed on the seafloor that's single function. So it's specifically to create habitat, to promote fishing and diving. So things like jetties and breakwaters and port walls and all those things that can also create habitat wouldn't be considered an artificial reef. So this tugboat, the sole purpose is to sink to create habitat, provide fishing and diving. And so you can see they filled this up with water, they cut holes in it, let it slowly come out. You're going to see it kind of push all the air out of there. It's surrounded by boats because if you see a big tugboat like this going under, you're going to want to sit and watch it. You can see they did a great job. They landed right on top of this flag that we put down, and we actually had to go retrieve that shortly afterwards. And so that's the sinking of material. And then what does that look like when it's underwater? This is the Indra on AR 330, which is about 10 miles off of the Beaufort Inlet. And so right here, you can see a little Atlantic spadefish hiding in there. And so this has been around for 20, almost 30 years, and it's covered up with life. It's got bait fish. It's got a lot of small fish and bigger fish that are hiding in there. And it's, even though some pieces are falling apart as a vessel, as it gets older, that's eventually going to happen, but it's going to work great as habitat and continues to be a popular site. So next, I'll give you kind of a brief history of artificial reefs. So first off, in North Carolina, people noticed in World War II, as a lot of people know, North Carolina is known as the graveyard of the Atlantic. There are a lot of shipwrecks out there, a lot of World War II shipwrecks. And so people started to notice that the fishing was really good on these shipwrecks. The only problem is they're way off away from the beach. So you need to have a pretty good vessel to get out there. And so next, fishing clubs started promoting and trying to create their own reefs by sinking materials. And this led to the first permitting in the late 60s of a reef that later became AR 315, one of our most popular artificial reefs. And so they used various materials, testing out different things, seeing what would work. And there were a lot of things that they found out didn't work. So they used washing machines, they used car bodies, small vessels like sailboats, metal vessels, and a well-known one, tires, which was pretty popular for attempted reef material along the East Coast and some various parts of the world. The problem with that is they found out underwater, a tire becomes neutrally buoyant. So it's not floating and it's not sinking. And so what ends up happening is it gets moved by storms. And so then we have to look into cleaning up those areas that now have tires in them. But they did do some great things and things that we still do today. So various types of concrete and then ships. So on the top, you have the schoolhouse ship, and the bottom you
Zach,
have.
I think your slides aren't advancing. We're
Okay.
still on the video.
Okay.
Maybe stop sharing and then reshare again. Maybe it got hung up.
Okay. Let's try one more time. Sorry about that. How about now?
It's thinking. So right now it's just, it says that you've started screen sharing, but it's not popping up. Maybe stop again and try one more time.
Mm-hmm. Any difference there?
No, it still says you're screen sharing. If you want to just kind of keep talking and email me a copy of the presentation, I can share it and see if that'll work.
Does that make any difference?
No. Oh, wait. Yes.
Okay.
That worked. Oh, right. Now we're on, now we see it on the right track. All right. Fantastic.
Perfect. All right. So I'll get back into it. So here you have a tire reef, like I talked about, and then you also have ships. So now you can see on the top is the schoolhouse wreck, and on the bottom is the Markham. Both of these are very popular fishing and diving locations off of Wilmington, and they've hung around a long time. They were great ships and still very active spots in those areas. And so now our artificial reef system looks more like this, where we have 68 artificial reefs across the coast. And so 43 of those are offshore, and then 25 of them are inshore. And among the inshore ones, you have 15, each of the ones that have their own special name, that serve as oyster sanctuaries. And so those are still artificial reefs, but they're used to try and promote oyster growth, and you're not allowed to fish for oysters on top of them. You can fish for finfish, but you can't take oysters away from those. And what we've tried to do is create opportunity among the entire coast, both inshore and offshore, for people to fish and dive. So whether you're going out by a kayak, you're going to be standing on the bank, you're going to be taking out a small vessel, even a large vessel going way offshore, there's a huge range of artificial reefs to go to for fishing opportunity, depending on what you're looking at. And so our current objectives, we have two main objectives, and the first is our social objective. And so what we're trying to do is promote fishing and diving in North Carolina. As I said, our funding, a large portion of that comes from sport fish restoration grants. And so that is money that's collected from things like taxes on gasoline for boats and fishing tackle, et cetera, and used to go back into the fishing program to try and promote fishing. The next is ecological. So we also want to create habitat in an area where there isn't existing habitat. And we want to have a diverse range of habitat that can be utilized by all sorts of things. So you see a moray eel here, but you also see an apex predator in the sand tiger shark there, and an upper level predator in the gag grouper, whereas a middle to low level predator in your black sea bass. And so we want a full range of things that can utilize this. And so let's focus on the social for a minute. Our overall social goal is to create equitable fishing opportunity and diving opportunities. We want that to be inshore and offshore for people who can or don't want to go way offshore. Not everybody enjoys being out in the ocean. It's definitely can be a risky thing, and it may not be your thing. But we also want to make sure it's accessible by the public in a reasonable way. So a lot of our reefs are set up around boat ramps, around major inlets, in ways that can be accessed as easily as possible. And then we also have a regional approach to projects. And so we currently have a project going on that's a 5-year project where we are using each year to promote a specific region of North Carolina. So we have broken up the Outer Banks, Raleigh Bay, Northern and Southern Onslow Bay, and Long Bay. And so each year we've done a different project at a reef within one of those bays to try and spread out our work and make it equally shared across the whole coast. And then we're trying to promote fishing and diving as well, not just give opportunity, but tell people about it. So that leads into outreach. We, in 2015, 2016, created an artificial reef guide. That's a paper guide on waterproof paper you could take with you, and had information on all the material up to that point. Now we have since moved forward, because we've had a lot of changes since then, and created an interactive artificial reef map. And so this you can find on our artificial reef website. And this includes the layer of materials. It tells you where it is, what it is, and you can get exact coordinates to one type of material, when it was put down, all this great information. And so that we update as regularly as we can when we do mapping. So any new material is going to go up on that website. The nice thing is, if you're going to fish inshore or offshore and you have cell service, you can actually pull it up on your phone and watch yourself just like a GPS. And see where, if you're sitting on top of material, or if the material is 10 feet away from you, and that's why you're not getting bites here. And so we use that when we go out on the boat as well. And so another part of the social impact is working with partners. So not just trying to promote fishing, but working with fishing groups and other diving groups to try and promote our projects and partner with them. So when we partner with a group, our program holds the permit, but we get guidance from our partners on what they would like, where they would like it. If there's a reef that hasn't had much material, if there's a reef that works better than one of the other ones, or is just more popular. So over the past kind of 5-year project, we've gotten to work with some great partners. The Brian Davis Artificial Reef Memorial, which I'll talk about more in a minute, the Ocracoke Island Civic and Business Association, Outer Banks Anglers Club, East Carolina Artificial Reef Association, and the Long Bay Artificial Reef Association. So those groups submitted applications when we went out for public comment, explaining that we're going to be doing these projects. They came up with ideas and invested some into the plan as well. And so we're partnering with them on what to put where within their region. And then we also have some special projects we do. And so one is a yearly project known as Eternal Reefs. So Eternal Reefs is a company based out of Florida that will take the ashes of a cremated loved one and mix it into a reef ball, and then put a plaque on that reef ball and sink it at a reef in North Carolina. And so that way that loved one can be commemorated and create habitat on one of our artificial reefs. We just got done with another deployment that was very successful, and it's been great every time, and a really great joy to be a part of, because you get to see family members brought out to see the commemoration of their loved one and watch this reef ball get dropped, and they have a ceremony and they throw flowers, and it's really a wonderful event every year. The next is Bonner Bridge. So those of you who know the Outer Banks, you know there was a bridge connecting the Outer Banks called Bonner Bridge, and that was recently taken down. Here's a video of them deploying some of that bridge. It's a construction company, and we were able to get partnered in early on, where they are putting these on our artificial reefs. And so creating habitat that way, so they don't have to just destroy concrete and throw it somewhere else, but we can actually make some function out of it. The last one, as I mentioned, was the Brian Davis Memorial Fund. That one was a very special project. Brian Davis was a diver who passed away from the Wilmington area, and he was known to be an avid diver, well known in the community, a spear fisherman. And so his family and friends put a GoFundMe up, and they raised, I believe, almost $60,000 or more, and partnered with us. And so we pooled our funds. They were hoping for maybe a 90-foot tugboat. Instead, we got this 180-foot Coast Guard buoy tender, which we even got the contractors to put the Brian Davis over top of. On your right side of the screen, you can see a large headboat, and that's actually filled with all of Brian Davis's family and friends who were able to come commemorate it, as well as other friends on boats around. This was a great success. It sank perfectly, and also just a really wonderful project to get to do. A lot of times our projects are just trying to create habitat and fishing spots, but this one was really great along the lines of Eternal Reefs as well, of getting to commemorate people and getting to bring in people who aren't necessarily more associated with offshore fishing and diving, but really getting to enjoy having some ownership in this and commemorate their loved one. So you can see this went down very well. All the air comes out, and it was just a great success, a really nice project to be a part of. And so we immediately go and dive these wrecks to make sure that they're safe, to make sure there's nothing hanging off of them. And so one of our biologists, who's also a great photographer, got some shots of that, which was a wonderful thing to see and to get to share with those friends and family. And so just a great dive. And we've heard a lot of people really enjoying that wreck. This is off of Topsail Island at AR 368. So then we look at our ecological impact. The first thing we're going to talk about is concerns. So we don't want to mess up the ecology. So we're talking the first thing would be material instability. So as I mentioned, those tire reefs, that is pretty common up and down the East Coast. As storms come through, those get moved up. And so especially the late 80s, early 90s, that was a big problem of tires washing up on beaches. It still happens sparingly in different regions of the US, but it's been something that's we've put a lot of effort into cleaning up and trying to prevent in the future. The next would be pollution. So thankfully, this is not a picture from any of our activities, but shows the horrible effects of potential oil spills. So when we're looking at sinking a ship or some other kind of material that's worked around hazardous chemicals, our contractors are really good at cleaning those up, making sure that it's not going to add anything into the water that's going to hurt the ecology, that's going to hurt people who may be fishing and collecting those fish or eating those fish. And so that's a really big mindful thing we have. And then also just existing habitat. We don't want to put a bunch of concrete pipe on top of habitat that's already there and destroy that habitat. So we're going to do a lot of mapping, which I'll talk about in a minute, about making sure that there's nothing there that's already living, that's already existing in that area. So then our ecological impact, what are our goals and the positive things we want? So we want to create habitat. So we want to create a new area where there wasn't anything in that finfish and invertebrates and all the things that are going to live around or on top of a structure can now inhabit and use, whether it's for refuge or feeding or whatever it may be. So like this oyster toadfish here that's hiding in some artificial reef material, not the most photogenic of the fish we get to see, but really interesting fish when you get to see it, likes to croak at you a lot. So then we also like to try and supplement the surrounding reef areas. So we want to create something that's adding refuge, that's adding structure for those invertebrate things, so corals and sponges and algae to grow on, as well as refuge for finfish and other types of shellfish. And then we want to monitor the ecological impact and provide strategy for our projects as we move forward. So see what's working, what's not. The same way we looked at the fact that washing machines don't work well as artificial reef material, so we're not going to use them, we're going to use something else. And so we're trying to create ecological habitat for all sorts of living things, like this moray eel here we found on hiding under one of our wrecks. That's a fun one to see, but we don't want to get too close because they can be a little temperamental. But you also have a couple small fish that are hiding under this wreck as well. So you get all sorts of things that are using this as refuge. And so one big thing that we need to do is lean on research of those around us who are looking at the effectiveness of the things that we're doing. So one big paper was by John F. Caddy. And so he's looking at the natural fractal habitats. Now, if y'all have heard of fractals, it's a kind of a geometric shape or repetitive shape, and it's basically saying in natural habitats, the smaller the refuge size or the smaller the hole that a fish can fit in, the more abundant those little holes are. The bigger, the less abundant. So if you're a big fish or if you're a small fish that's growing to a big fish, as you get bigger, there's less places for you to hide in. And so you have to move away from that reef that you were already living in, that natural reef that you kind of grew up in, you're going to have to go find somewhere else. But if we can use artificial reefs that have larger refuge size based off of whatever fish we're looking at providing habitat for, we can really help the bottleneck or help the difficulty of the artificial reefs for a fish that's going to grow too big for it. Or sorry, the natural reefs. For a fish that's going to grow too big and run out of space, it can use a bigger space that we provide in an artificial reef. And so you can see a little bit of that here in a natural hard bottom habitat we found, where you have some small black sea bass and sand bass, but you see there's not a lot of big places to hide here. And so if you're a small fish, that works, but if you're a large fish, it's not going to work quite as well. Another one's going to be Paxton 2017. And so this is looking at, this is a complicated graph, but looking at how artificial reefs and natural reefs line up. And so you can see the ship, which is that darker red, kind of has a different group of species than the natural reefs, and the concrete kind of fits with the natural reefs. But some of the fish species that are included, or the families that are included, Odontospididae and Sphaeronidae and Leucanidae, are big apex or high-level predators. So those ships are able to include those apex predators, and the concrete has similar species to those natural reefs. So this sand tiger shark is going to be more often seen on a shipwreck. The next is going to be Lemoyne in 2019, who is looking a little more at this, but looking at those specific types. So we can see this, and some conclusions we can find is that concrete structures have different species makeups or different species metrics, but still fit similarly to those rocky reefs on the bottom left, whereas shipwrecks have higher levels of these species metrics. So we have a higher abundance, higher biomass, higher richness, and so you're getting more types of fish and just more fish in general. And so you can kind of see that here. If you pay attention to the right side of the screen, you can see a friend that we didn't know was there at the time. Until we came back and reviewed our video. There was a 7 or 8 foot sand tiger shark who saw us swimming in and just didn't want to deal with us. But you can see the abundant amount of fishes all around here. You have bait fish kind of all over. And so that's a big difference between ships and concrete material. Then we have Rosemond in 2018, who looked at if you have a shipwreck or some kind of material, it's not just the fish living on that material. You actually have this halo effect of fishes that live around that material, but maybe not directly on it. And so we can use that to determine how far we should space our material apart when we go to deploy new material. And then Paxton in 2019 took that a little further and looked at what is working in that sense and what's in that distribution. We have zooplankton, or kind of free swimming small animals. And then you have right up on the ships, planktivorous fishes, or those living on plankton. And then further off, you have piscivorous, those that are eating fish. And so that distribution is really helpful. And so we see that when we go dive, it may be hard to see, but there is actually a flounder sitting there right under that material. And so this is one of those instances of a halo effect around our material. You have these cryptic species, especially, that are really difficult to spot unless you have a keen eye like some of our divers. And they're there to feed off of the wandering bait fish that move away from that material. And that effect is really big. And we don't want to destroy the habitat they're using as well around our artificial reef places. So then the ecological impact, how do we combine this? So one big thing with the caddy research is material size. And so we could just put out whatever's cheapest, but one big thing we try to do is plan for what material size is going to work best. So this is some reef balls we had made for an inshore project that we'll be creating in just a month or two in Bogue Sound, right off of Morehead City. And so what we did there is determine the largest common fish that might find refuge in an artificial reef in the inshore area, and find something that could fit them so the small fish can use it as well, but the big fish as well are supplemented, have some refuge. Whereas these are some reef balls we also had made for offshore projects, and these are each 5, almost 6 feet tall, weigh up to 6,000 pounds. But the ones on the left, you're going to have a hard time letting a gag grouper that can be 30, 40, even larger inches fitting into one of those little reef balls. whereas they can now fit into one of these larger ones if it's offshore, where they may be more available, as we don't tend to see those inshore. And then spacing. So spacing is a big thing to learn from these sets of research. And this is one of our deployment plans. You can see that we had a boat, the American and America, and those are planned, as well as a boat called the Valley Forge. And so the American was already deployed, and then we're planning around that to determine our spacing so we don't get in the way of those halo areas, but also get some interactions. We have looking at different interactions of different types of material. We have two boats next to each other, a set of pipe and another vessel set next to each other, and then a mound of pipe off by itself to see how those interact, and also use what we've learned already, and then try and promote further understanding of our materials in these places. So this is the plan for AR 165 off Oregon Inlet and the Outer Banks. And so we're currently, we all only have the Valley Forge left to deploy. So that has just recently received 2 vessels and 2 sets of pipe. And so we've got 1 left to finish this deployment plan. But material type is a big part. How are those going to interact? So the ships interacting, the pipe and a ship interacting, also the grouping of those and supplementing if we have higher diversity on a ship and lower diversity, but more specific kind of bottom fishes on the pipe, then we can supplement those together to allow for a better ecological impact. So then from DMF standpoint, how are we monitoring this? So the first big thing that we're doing is mapping. So we have a boat that we conduct bathymetric survey with. And that's a big way of saying that we take, instead of taking pictures, because the water is sometimes dark, we use sound to do that. And so this gives us 3 different outputs. The first is a 3D bathymetric depth map. And so you can see here, this is a bathymetric depth map of some natural oyster rock that we did in Pamlico Sound. And you can actually get some of the, a good look at the relief, how that actually looks compared to the seafloor. So those parts that are in red and yellow and green are the actual oyster rock growing or living on top of the seafloor there. Next, we get backscatter from the bathymetry, and that's going to show us things like seafloor hardness, and we can use that to determine what's moving where. So when you put material down, you're going to get the currents changing around those types of material and moving the sediment differently. You get a little bit of turbulence, just like your car, when wind goes around, it pushes the wind around. So we then also get reflectivity or side scan. And so this is kind of like shining a light to the side. We're not getting any information other than an image. And this is what you see on a GPS unit if you're on a boat. A lot of them have a side scan feature. Ours is just a little more complex, a little more accurate. But we can get these great images like this from AR 381 in Cedar Point, that you can see each concrete box that we've put out there. And you can also see some divots created from that sediment movement. And so we then move to put these into our online interactive reef guide. So this is a clip out from our interactive reef guide. This is an old side scan image, but you can very well see that boat. So again, if you had this up and you had cell service, you could see the dot of your GPS right on top of that boat and see I'm on the bow or I'm on the stern, know exactly where you are, and also just see these little bits of material around it. And then we can also look at things like sediment transport. So this is one of our sites off Topsail Island that after Hurricane Florence, we knew this area is prone to having thin layers of sand that can expose hard bottom. And so we went out immediately and mapped this area and used that backscatter to determine if there was anything that was potential hard bottom. We came up with these 3 sites and we went and dove them, and that was the previous natural hard bottom you saw. We found 2 of those sites actually had exposed hard bottom from this hurricane. And so using that information, we were able to determine that there was sediment scour pulled away. We can also look for deposition of sediment, but it exposed hard bottom, and then we don't want to build on those areas, because if they're living and having invertebrates and finfish that are living on those areas, we don't want to disrupt that. So if we do any building on this reef, it'll be on the other side away from those so as to not disturb them, but still try and supplement those. So more ways of how we're monitoring. So We also do a lot of diving and video recording underwater. And so we try and go out and look at material. And the first thing we're looking at is stability and durability. So if we put down a 20-foot metal or aluminum boat that somebody donated, how long is that going to stay? Unfortunately, most boats are not very thick. If they're little aluminum boats, they end up rusting and falling apart pretty quick. So we want to see what types of vessels are going to work and determine from that the ships that we're going to be using. So because of this information, we stick primarily to tugboats, which are made of generally thicker metal because they're big, rough tugboats that are bumping into barges, and they don't want to be something that's flimsy. And so those last a long time, as well as military or Coast Guard vessels are also generally made of thick metals that work well. So ship hull thickness is something that's important, and we actually monitor for that and test that when we look at potential boats. We gauge the thickness of those. So next is concrete modules and recycled concrete. We want to see, did they flip upside down, or they're not sitting properly? Are they falling apart and degrading, or are they moving from storms? That would be a big problem if we're suddenly scattering a bunch of concrete material out. Next, we do video surveys of finfish. And so that includes, we have stationed videos that we record finfish on material to see what type of fish are present there. We do roving diver surveys. This is not exactly a roving diver survey, as it's generally swum in a straight line, but that's one of our technicians, Nick, who wanted to show off his beard underwater. And so that's a big way we look at what's actually present on these. And so moving forward, there's answers that we want to look for and get answers from our researchers on. So the first one is we want some kind of reference tool so we can have better decision making and create more positive biological impacts as we create reefs in the future and enhance reefs in the future. And next, we want to know everything we can about what public is using our artificial reefs, which ones they like, which ones they don't, and why. And so there's some current research that we're really excited to look out for, and I've been able to share a bit with you because of these researchers being so willing and helpful. So one of them is an NC State, a PhD candidate named Shannon Ritchie. She was actually a NC Space Grant and Sea Grant Fellow receiver, which is a big deal. And so she's doing a brand new thing where she's using high resolution satellite imagery and comparing that to tracking vessels to see who's using artificial reefs. And so here she has 4 different reefs set up, and you can see the top left is fished or dove, or you just use in general significantly less than the other 3. And I say significantly, but I don't know the statistics because it's her work. But there does seem to be a big difference in those artificial reefs. And so you can see a big change in which ones people are preferring. And then another big thing is she's going to compare those seasonally, and she can compare it by material type, which is hugely helpful for us. So if we look at this, you can see where those people have landed directly on top of the material from our artificial reef guide online. And so we can tell that there are a lot of people over top of the vessel and the consolidated concrete, and less so over top the aircraft. And so it may be that those areas have degraded, they don't notice them, or you can see the small bits of material kind of down in the middle right that there's not many people around, and that's also just hard to see on a GPS unit if you don't run directly over it. So things like that we can determine, is there a preferred material type for fishermen or divers or both? And then we can use that in the future to try and create artificial reefs in that way. And then some other research by the National Center for Coastal Ocean Science, the habitat mapping team, which is based out of Beaufort, or at least a portion of it. And so they have reached out to us and other state entities about their Southeast US seafloor mapping project. And so they are using state agencies to delineate areas of interest that they want mapped on a large scale and much more finely tuned statistically than what we're able to do with our survey boat, because they have ships like the Nancy Foster, which are 4 to 5 times the size of our vessel. And so they allowed us to help delineate areas that we would like to see mapped. And so you can see some information they've given us. Here's what's known as a point cloud. So this is the same bathymetry data, but just tuned in a lot nicer than what ours tends to come out with. They have PhDs and we do not. So you can see around these vessels, not only do you get a very clear outline of that vessel and every little piece of it, whether it's the bow or the stacks or the stern, but you can also see groupings of fish over top of it, and see how they were moving across that vessel. They're using bathymetric survey like our vessel is, but a higher level of that, as well as echo sounder, which is looking at those fish and can overlay the fish on top of that to show us where the fish are around our natural or our artificial reefs. And then they can use this to map on a broad scale to show us exactly large pieces like vessels that are located on or around artificial reefs or in surveyed habitat in the US, but also very small scale pieces like this metal down at the bottom that may have been metal taken off of some of these vessels or from some other project or something else, but we can see those interactions and see what is there on a much broader scale. And so the next question is, where do we go from here? So I was able to work and co-author with some great researchers on a paper we have in review. And the big thing with that is the next step for us is including artificial reefs in marine spatial planning. So marine spatial planning is planning out how the ocean is used from various different aspects. So we're talking about energy consumption, energy collection, resource collection, artificial reefs, natural reefs, transport. And so we want to plan our artificial reefs with an ecological mindset to be able to create habitat the most effectively, but also create networks of our habitats. So here you can see on the left, we have 3 artificial reefs set up that are just placed outside of primarily trade routes. So we don't want to get in the way of large vessels, but aren't set up to interact necessarily with the existing habitats. And so, as I mentioned before, things like oil rigs and wind energy and all sorts of utilization of offshore areas can still create habitat, whether that's jetties and port walls and breakwaters as well. So by being mindful on how we plan out our artificial reefs and where we plan them, we can try and set up some ecological connectivity to supplement natural reefs and the existing habitat on other ocean creation or anthropogenic influences on the ocean. So things that are man-made. And then we can adaptively manage that. So that what that looks like is siting our artificial reefs in an ecological mindset. So setting our ecological goals on what we want to accomplish with that artificial reef, and then fitting that into the marine spatial planning and following up with rigorous evaluation of that ecology and those ecological goals, and then managing that to move forward and changing what is working and what isn't, and fitting that into an overall marine spatial plan of what else is being put out in that ocean. And so I'm going to leave you with some footage from our lead artificial reef technician, Nick Hendricks, and some words from one of my favorite pieces of literature that's just talking about the importance of ecological restoration and creation and monitoring of habitat like this. And so there's an internally recognized beauty of motion and balance on any man-healthy planet. You see in this beauty a dynamic, stabilizing effect essential to all life. Its aim is simple: to maintain and produce coordinated patterns of greater and greater diversity. Life improves the closed system's capacity to sustain life. All life is in the service of life. Necessary nutrients are made available to life by life in greater and greater richness as the diversity of life increases. The entire landscape comes alive, filled with relationships and relationships within relationships. That's from Dune by Frank Herbert. So again, thank y'all for letting me help celebrate Earth Month with y'all, and I appreciate your time.
Awesome, Zach. Thank you so much. That was just a really fascinating look at this topic. So I have some questions for you. So let me. Pull it up. So, well, the North Carolina Aquarium at Pine Knoll Shores said they are pretty interested in the reef balls that you're putting in Bogue Sound because that's in their backyard. so,
Certainly.
so you should definitely connect with them. And then Glenn has a question. How long does it take after creating a new reef for it to begin to be colonized?
So that's a great question, and that's one we weren't sure about, but one of the first wrecks I showed you, which was the Fort Fisher right off of Pine Knoll Shores, we were there monitoring it, and it sank, and as soon as it hit the bottom, we moved up to drop our anchor to dive and make sure that there wasn't any hazards. As we pulled up to drop the anchor, we saw under our boat a large caudal fin or tail fin of what I would expect to be some form of shark. And by the time we got down there, maybe 10 minutes later, there were already juvenile gag grouper, bait fish, some small reef fish. So it's very fast. And then some other research we've seen shows that they can actually interact and the communities will start to match other material within a few months. And so you have things like corals that will take a long time, but as far as those fishes, a lot of them are looking for refuge right away. And if they hear something hard hit the bottom, they're going to be on it fast.
That is amazing. Like really amazing. They seem so excited that it's there. So Wesley has a question. Is there an average depth for the artificial reefs?
So most of our offshore reefs, we do have to follow a certain depth that the material can't get to. So within 20 feet is usually the case of the surface so that we don't interrupt boats. We don't want anybody to hit anything. So for offshore reefs, most of them are 40 feet and deeper. And then inshore reefs, we mark them with buoys. It's too difficult to mark the offshore ones, but that way we have a little more room. So we have reefs as shallow as 4 or 5 feet in certain well-marked areas. The one that we're going to be building in Bogue Sound is generally at high tide about 8 to 9 feet to the sand and then 2 feet above with reef balls. So they're common free diving spots if you're really into free diving and willing to hold your breath to get down to 40 feet. And things like the Fort Fisher stick up almost to that 20 feet limit. So you can kick down from the surface to that pretty easily, even if you're not experienced.
Very cool. Yeah, you definitely don't want boats hitting them. I would imagine.
Certainly not.
I have a question. So I understand the value of creating habitat for these animals. So are we creating these artificial reefs because habitat has been destroyed? That so is nature not moving fast enough to support these animals? Or so what is the why are we supplementing what's already there?
That's a good question. So originally, the artificial reef started as promoting fishing and trying to find a place to fish because the places are kept very secret by fishermen. Even today, there are people within our group that won't give up their spots of fishing. But that was how it started. And now we're looking at the fact that the hard part to wrap your mind around is the ocean, when you don't have a natural habitat there, is a desert. If you just have sand, that's still just a desert. You have things floating in naturally, but there's nothing really there for fish. And so by creating habitat, we're creating something where nothing was. Now, whether or not we're doing something that the natural reefs need help on, or if we're just pulling fishermen away from those natural reefs so that they can recover, there's a lot of research that's yet to be done on exactly what that effect is. But we're creating something where nothing exists. And so we're looking to create an overall positive effect by creating habitat and refuge for these fishes.
I think that's really interesting, especially when you're saying you're pulling, maybe some things that have heavy impact away from the natural systems that may need to recover. And I do feel like the ocean needs all the help we can give it right now. So,
It does.
So Lisa has a question. So have you had a moment while diving around these reefs that unnerved you?
So some friends and I like to go dive these reefs in like weekends in our spare time. And one of them, we were spearfishing Actually, the reef I told you that you noticed, if you saw, there was a large sand tiger shark that swam away. I know based on some of the research that a lot of them will be long-term residents of one spot. So I feel confident saying it was the same sand tiger, but my dive partner shot a large grouper. And so I had to kind of fend off and get this sand tiger to leave us alone while we got it up to the boat. That happens pretty commonly with barracuda as well. But the sand tiger being 7, almost 8 feet long was pretty unnerving. Once we got through it, it was a good story, but we weren't certain at that moment.
Wow. So yeah, that's unnerving. Yes, I would not want to have to, I would have just given him the grouper.
Yeah. Sometimes that's the easiest. A lot of spear fishermen refer to them as the tax man, and eventually the tax man gets his due. So
Right, exactly. Would say better the grouper than say like a hand.
certainly.
So Michael wants to know, how can someone get to work with the artificial reef program? And can a group of people help you with the monitoring of the reef systems? And who do they need to contact? And do you have any internships available?
So coming up, we don't have any internships right away, but every year we do look out and can set up the system for having interns come in. And there's generally, those are over the summer, and they're projects that we need help on. So it's a lot of times reviewing video or something, but you get to get a lot of more information on that. The way our diving goes, we're very particular about the safety regulations, of course, and setting those up to be well-trained people. So we keep that in-house. But there are certainly groups among those artificial reef associations and Spot a Shark and things like that that go out looking for ways to monitor those, as well as reaching out to researchers is always usually helpful because a lot of times they're looking for some more help. But you can reach out to me with any questions or anything as well. So that'd be great.
Awesome. So I have a question. So what's your background? How did you get to be doing this?
So I did my bachelor's in marine biology at UNC Wilmington, and then I did a master's at East Carolina, which was ecology and evolution, based more on freshwater, but tried to focus on some diverse ecology and learn as much as I could. And then have also had some experience with diving and free diving and running boats. And so I started as a technician at DMF, just maintaining our boats and our trucks and going out and doing this field work, which is fun until you get out in the Sound in the middle of January and you break ice on your way out, and then you have to sit underwater for 20 minutes. It's less glamorous then, but worked my way up and got to here. And so I've enjoyed every minute of it, but just being willing to learn everything. And what they don't tell you is sometimes a biologist includes being a construction worker and running a front end loader. So as many different skills as you can get will help.
That's awesome. In fact, yeah, I agree with that wholeheartedly. And I think that that's such an important lesson, is that you never know what these skills that you may pick up here and there, how they're going to help you in your career, right? So it's not just about the education, which is of course very important, but it's about the other skills as well. So I have one last question. And what can and should each one of us be doing to help protect the oceans? So talking about Earth Month, almost done with Earth Month, what should we all be doing to have the greatest positive impact?
Certainly. So that's a big one. I think a big thing is just being mindful. It's pretty easy around the ocean, or if you live in a remotely coastal area, understanding that whatever you do may have an effect. So little things like littering may not seem like much on the side of the road, but that does eventually get into our ocean. And so being mindful of our own impact, trying to just clean up after ourselves, leave it a little better than you can. And that's kind of the biggest one is just that. Otherwise, there's all sorts of little things you can do and debate on whether you use the right sunscreen that hurts coral reefs. But a big one is just, I'd rather you keep plastic out of the water and keep things that are going to be unsafe to the ecology down there.
Awesome. I love that. I feel like it is such a basic, um, just such a basic thing to do is like not litter. And then also just picking up other litter that you see. That's one of the main things that I have a 10-year-old daughter. We do that everywhere we go. We just pick up, we leave it nicer than we found it. So I think that is such a great lesson. So thank you, Zach, so much for doing this program for us. It's been a wonderful Earth Month. I do want to say, when talking about plastics, we had a talk on Earth Day about zero waste. So go to the YouTube channel and check it out, because it gets some good tips on how we can lessen our impact by throwing fewer things away. Thank you all for joining us today. Thank you again, Zach. And thank you to the Office of Environmental Education and the museum for hosting these programs every week. And please join us next Wednesday. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks.